Welcome everyone. Welcome Kevin. We have all gathered today to learn something more about coming home. And about Kevin and his work. At the beginning, Kevin, I've Googled you.
Oh.
Yes. And there's not very much to find about you.
Oh, thank God for that.
I found out that there's a lot of Kevin McCanns.
True.
And I also found a little bit of something about you.
Was it good?
Yes.
Good.
So at your work, you actually cover quite an amount of areas of counseling.
Yes.
And you work with individuals, families, couples, parents, organizations, companies. And your theoretical approach is process-oriented gestalt therapy.
Yes.
Yes. Google is right. So can you maybe explain what exactly is gestalt therapy and why have you chosen it to work with?
Okay. There's two questions. Yeah. The first one is, what is gestalt therapy? And gestalt therapy is a way of understanding the client in the ground or the environment from which that client comes. So we are a field-based, we call a field-based phenomenological theory. To fully understand anyone's experience, you need to understand the environment from which they come. And by understanding the environment, you can fully understand how that individual has adapted themselves to survive in that environment. Because everything we do as human beings is in the service of staying safe and surviving. And we call it adaptation. So we have to adapt to the environment that we find ourselves in. The sole purpose of any organism is to survive. Primarily, it is to survive. And so what we do, whilst it may not look healthy, it probably at one time was extremely healthy. For example, if as an LGBTQ person, if I live in an environment that says it is not okay to be you, and I learn to withdraw and make myself small and don't rock the boat too much, that's very healthy. That helps me survive as a child. If I keep doing that as an adult, I'm in trouble. Then I never get fully seen, I never get fully heard, and I'm not home. I'm actually at the dependence of the environment. So we must always support that which was intelligent, help me survive. But if I keep doing it, it then goes into what we call in Gestalt therapy, it goes into character, which means it's frozen in time. So I'm still doing something as an adult that was very healthy as a child, but it doesn't serve me now as an adult. And sometimes that's really difficult to change. Not impossible, but difficult. And what drew me to Gestalt therapy was that Gestalt therapy was the only therapy that allowed me to be me. I didn't have to be a therapist. I could be humorous. I could be irreverent. I could challenge authority. Don't forget that Gestalt therapy grew out of the 60s in the US, when therapists were part of the civil rights movement and they were part of the feminist movement and part of the gay rights movement. And I liked the idea that I as a therapist could impact change in my environment. And I could bring Gestalt therapy to the women's refuge in my local town, or I could bring it to the gypsy community, or I could bring it to the rape crisis center and help the victims, male and female, of rape. And Gestalt therapy allowed me to do that because it wasn't goal orientated. It's to help the client understand their individual process. And we all do things very individually. We all have very individual ways of surviving. All of them are healthy. It's knowing when they stop being healthy is the work of the therapist to help you understand. So I guess does that answer? Okay, okay.
I think that for the first time I understand Gestalt.
I still don't understand it.
Well, a little bit more, because every time until now when I ask people, can you tell me what exactly is Gestalt therapy? I never understood. So I said, okay. But what? So thank you.
I guess the other thing that interested me in Gestalt is that we weren't just looking at cognition. We weren't just diagnosing people and say, you're a paranoid schizophrenic, or you're codependent, or you're addicted, or you've got transference issues, or you've got attachment issues. We know all that. So what? Tell me something new. What I want to know is, how do I do that? Can you help me understand how I do that so that I can undo it? We don't need labels. I mean, labels are for fashion. You know, it's easy to put a label.
Have you always known that this is what you'll be doing in your life? Did you have that aha moment? Okay, this is it. I want to do this. Or have you known it?
Oh God, no.
Or how long?
Oh God, no. I had no idea I'd ever be a therapist. I still don't think I'm a therapist. It's weird. I find this very weird. Me talking as a therapist. I find it very weird. I grew up in a very tough neighborhood. A really tough, poverty-ridden neighborhood. You don't be a therapist coming out of that type of neighborhood. That was for middle-class kids and for very wealthy kids. It wasn't for poor people. Extremely poor people. I came to be a therapist by accident. I was in therapy myself for many years. I was in psychoanalysis, and then I was in with a psychotherapist, and I was doing my master's. I am a chef by profession. So I know. Can you believe it? Little old me. Huh? I was a master chef by profession. So I taught international cookery, and I taught food science and culinary history. And that was my passion. So food was my passion. And I lived in a very macho world of tall hats and medals and ribbons and screaming chefs and very high-powered stuff. And I was in therapy, and I was doing my culinary masters when I came across this book called Ego, Hunger and Aggression, which I thought had something to do with hunger and aggression. But it actually is the Bible of Gestalt therapy. And I started reading in it, and it was like the words on the page were speaking to me. And I knew nothing about Gestalt therapy, but I could understand the book, most of it, until I got to the middle, and then I said, I have no idea what this therapy is about. I'm completely lost. And it took me over a year to finish the book, and then I was even more lost. And I'm still reading the book, and I don't fully understand it. Most Gestalt therapists don't. They pretend they do, but actually it's a pretty difficult, dense book to get. And I just fell in love with Gestalt therapy, and I got out of psychoanalysis very quickly and found myself a Gestalt therapist. And then there was a degree course at the local university, which was the only one in Europe at the time that had Gestalt therapy as a degree course. And I enrolled and went at weekends and done my degree in Gestalt therapy. And then I trained with the GATLA organization in America, in Los Angeles, and qualified with them. And Tomasz is part of our faculty as well, and that's where we met. That's how I ended up here. So Tomasz invited me to come here. Yeah, so I'm with that. But I still pinch myself when I'm introduced as Kevin McCann psychotherapist, because it sounds very posh. If you said Kevin McCann chef, I'd probably go yes. Yes.
And who is Kevin? Who are you when you're not a therapist? You've already mentioned that you were a cook. I know also that you're a big rugby fan, that you like gardening,
True.
and that you very much love Ljubljana.
I actually am having an affair with Ljubljana.
Okay.
It's the only affair I've ever had without sex, but it's wonderful. Oh, actually, I am. I'm having an affair with Vigo ice cream.
Okay.
You know the ice cream place? I'm addicted. I'm absolutely addicted to the hazelnut ice cream in there.
I actually know quite more about you after this weekend, but I'd like to give you the space to share with us. Who is Kevin? What do you love to do? Where do you like to go?
Wow. The first thing is I'm actually very shy. Yes. This is not easy for me. I make it look easy, but actually there is the other half of me that is incredibly shy. So I have learned, because I was a lecturer for 30 years, how to overcome my shyness and my anxiety in public speaking. So if this looks easy, it's 30 years of hard work and anxiety, and my legs shaking and my tummy shaking and my voice shaking. So I'm actually quite a shy person, but very few people get to see the shy part. Yeah, I love rugby. I love rugby football. I played rugby football for years. I love Irish football, which is very different to soccer. I like to garden. I read a lot of research, so I like studying research. I love just meeting people in their humanity. I like meeting authentic people, no matter who they are, even if they don't like me, even if they're very opposed to who I am as a man who is gay. I still like to meet them. I don't want to demonize them. I want to meet them. If they're being real, then I can be real. I guess I don't like hypocrisy. I don't like people who smile and then do something different. So I like people to be real. I like gardening.
Do you have a garden?
Oh, yeah, I have a very beautiful garden, yeah. My husband sends me a photograph every day of the garden when I'm away. I know.
Does he water the plants?
No. I live in Ireland, you don't need to water plants. It rains, just like Ljubljana today it rains. I like watching things grow, yeah. I like my garden, yeah. I like solitude. I like being with people, but then I also need a lot of time alone. So I do some mountain walking. I like to walk in the mountains at home alone. I abhor abuse of power. Wherever I see it, I tend to challenge it. I'm very outspoken, regardless of where that power is being abused. So I guess it's a passion I've always had. I'm originally from the north of Ireland. If any of you are familiar with the conflict in Northern Ireland that we had raged for 30 years between two communities. That was presented as a religious war, or when actually it wasn't. It was a war about class and privilege and male power that dominated one part of a community. So when I see power being abused, I react very strongly, no matter where I see it. So I guess that would be another important part of me, yeah. And I love to dance. Oh yes, I forgot that, yeah. I love dance. Any movement. I got to see the Slovenian. I got to watch them in rehearsals. And I was like, wow. You can learn so much about a culture by watching folk dance. So I got to see that. It was wonderful. I like ballet, which is big for a rugby player to watch ballet. You know, where I come from, men don't go to the ballet. You know, real men don't watch dance. That's the gender stereotype, and certainly working class Irish men don't go to ballet. It's part of that stereotype that we interject. But I love all dance, jazz dance, music. So I have 2 shows booked while I'm here. Yeah. Yes. Oh, yes. I do sometimes think I'm funny.
But you are. I disagree.
Not really. Now I'm getting shy. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
I can only imagine what kind of stories people share with you during the therapy. And I know that sometimes also from my own experience that it's quite a lot to take as someone who's with that person. And based on all these years of experience, what was the biggest challenge you had to overcome as a therapist?
You mean working with the material that comes?
Yes. Yes.
Taking care of myself. I think it's really important that as therapists or social workers or care workers or psychologists, whatever, or an NGO, that you need to put you first. And I don't mean that in a selfish way, but in a way that I need to take care of me so that I'm healthy, that I can be with you. But if I overstretch myself or think that I can save the world or that I can see 8 clients a day and be healthy, that's not possible. So I limit my number of clients every day. I have a very long lunch. I take at least 2.5 hour lunch every day. I have a siesta. I walk a lot. I spend time in my garden. I do things that nourish me so that I'm well. And I have a very excellent supervisor who will very quickly tell me, you're getting overworked, so you need to stop now. And I stop. Because if I'm not well, for me, I can't be there for the other. So I have to put me first, and then I can be there. So I guess that's one of the things I really learned. Yeah.
You already said that you come from Ireland. Has life changed for all the members of the community since marriage equality and legal gender recognition have been achieved?
Yes and no.
Can you explain the yes part and the no part?
Yes, we are equal, and it changes how we feel inside. We are wonderfully equal, actually. You hear me? Okay. When I was coming over, I stayed at the airport hotel, and I was checking in, and sometimes my husband uses his name to make the booking, or sometimes I use my name to make the booking. And when I arrived, there was, she said, there's no room with your name. And then I realized he probably used his name, and I said, I think my husband may have booked me in. And the girl behind the counter just went, okay, and your husband's name is? And I said, Barbarello. He's Italian. And she said, okay, that's a lovely name. So we started having this talk. She said, where did you meet? Which is often the question, you know, an Italian guy, an Irish guy. And of course, I love telling the story. And I'm telling her the story. And this little girl came up beside me with €5. She wanted to change €5 to get sweets in the machine. And she heard the conversation. And so the girl was saying, and have we spelt Barbarello correctly and stuff on the computer? And I say, yeah, this is how you spell it, da-da-da. Which part of Ireland do you live in? I'm telling her all this. And she kept referring to my husband's name as Barbarello. And then the little girl looked up and she said, your husband's name is Barbarello. It's a strange word for an Irish person. So in that sense, yeah, it's very normal. And when we deal with the banks now, we talk about our husbands or our wives, or we deal with the insurance company, we refer to our husbands. We don't have to say partner anymore, which could mean anything. So yes, it's given us an inner sense of being home. And that's really hard to describe to anyone. To have that inner sense that you're equal to your neighbor It's very difficult to describe that, but it would also be very foolish to think that homophobia has suddenly disappeared. Because laws can also be statements of aspirations until they're enforced. So I don't believe for a moment that homophobia has disappeared. What I do know that in Ireland, you will not get away with it now. You will be brought to court very quickly, and we will do it. Make no mistake about it. It will. And people know that. So rates of bullying have certainly begun to drop quite considerably. Gay people are very visible, and gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people are very visible, being affectionate on the street, holding hands, kissing in restaurants, doing their shopping together with the kids. We're normalizing it as we go, and it's wonderful. And in 1 year, the change is quite dramatic, actually, to see. I was recently in a supermarket in Dublin, and there was a lovely young lesbian couple with their baby doing the shopping, and it was just, wow. I just winked. We didn't say anything, but they were, and I just winked, and it's like they knew, I knew, and it was just lovely. It was just one of those moments. It was just lovely because it's been normalized. It's like we're not on the edge anymore. But that's a generation. That's maybe 2 generations away. So I wouldn't be naive to think that there aren't young gay and lesbian, bisexual people right now experiencing some form of bullying. But certainly they won't get away with it. So that makes me very happy. And we done it by popular vote, which is the only country in the world to do it. And on the day that the referendum passed, the strangest part of that phenomena for me, I was actually in Dublin. I was in the square where the count took place. People didn't say, well done gay people, or well done lesbian people. People were hugging each other and saying, it's a great day to be Irish. So we were all together. So that I get emotional when I say that. It's like, because there was a national coming home. When I talk about coming home, very different to coming out. It's like brothers and sisters, we'd all done it, and people were hugging us on the main street. Anybody who's been to Dublin, it's O'Connell Street in Dublin. People were walking up, putting their arms around us saying, well done, lads. Straight people came out of the woodwork and hugged us and said, you know, it's about time. So that sense of things being different, yes. I walk taller now. I'm a small guy, but I walk a lot taller in my shoes. I feel much safer. It's had a wonderful experience, yeah, I think. Hello, welcome. We won't highlight that you're late, but welcome. Delighted you're here. And that you're late. Yeah, I know. You should see my blush behind the lights. Yeah, I know.
If we're talking about the process of coming home for the members of the community, at the workshop you said it's the process that's going on so many levels, as individual parents, brothers, sisters, as family, as you already mentioned, as the nation.
Yes.
What do we need on those levels to start the journey? To make that first step,
very good question.
That push.
Very good question. I think first we have to recognize our own homophobia. I'm homophobic.
I am too.
Yeah.
I know.
I'm much less homophobic than I was 40 years ago when I contemplated suicide most days and when I saw the inside of mental institutions. But I still have this little bit of homophobia. And to know your own level of homophobia and to begin to work with it therapeutically is what gets you home. It's not possible to come from a society that tells you it's not okay to be you and that you are shamed, that you do not get tainted with homophobia. In fact, it's impossible. What sets you free is knowing the extent to which you have it. When you start, you'll see it in the video later on. We have a video to show. When you start changing your body posture, your hand gestures, your tone of voice, when you don't hold your girlfriend's hand because you're at a family wedding, when everybody else at the family wedding gets up to dance to the love song and you and your girlfriend sit in the corner and they say, oh, that's Julia, that's her friend. That's not Julia, and that's her girlfriend. And they've been together for 20 years and they love each other as much as the bride and groom getting married. Or when you change your hairstyle because it's not acceptable or it might give you away. Or when gay men learn to butch up and don't ever know how to get back down again. When they build muscles and are afraid to let the muscles go. And if you want to see homophobia in action, go to a gay nightclub. See what happens. Because we internalize it and then we inflict it on each other, sometimes without even knowing. We call each other derogatory words. Demean each other. Faggot. We can call it, but if anybody outside calls it, or we call each other label queens, muscle queens, we do it in very subtle ways without knowing that that's what we're doing. When we over-sexualize ourselves, because that's the best that we can do. So I think part of the journey of coming home is if you can recognize it, then you're very aware of what you need to work with. And then we begin to challenge it, and not to be afraid to challenge homophobia when we see it in schools, in our families, in our workplaces. To begin to speak up and say that's not acceptable. I was one of the biggest jokers in the bar in my very late teens, early 19s, before I even had the courage to admit that I was a man who was gay. I would have made gay jokes. Now I cringe and I go, oh my God, I actually done that. But that was my internalized homophobia. I turned it in on myself. So, yeah, I think that's part of the journey of coming home is very different to coming out, because you can be very much out there. You can be in the clubs, you can be on the gay float at Gay Pride, you can be doing all of that, but you can be as far away from home as the next person. Home is here. Home is who you are authentically when you've brought home all the parts of you that you absolutely hate. I see some faces smiling. The parts of you that you hate, when you bring them home and you go through that struggle, then you're complete. You may never be fully complete because you may always have little reactions. Like this weekend I realized I had never said at home that I like ballet. And the last time I was in Ljubljana, I got to see the Mariinsky ballet, which was just like mind-blowing. And then I realized, you know what? Back in Ireland, I hadn't said that to many of my friends. So there was a little bit of that holding back still for me. So I think to get home, you have to accept that we all, it's difficult for our community to say that we too are homophobic. We've been tainted by it. It's called shame.
I understand what you're saying, but at the same time, I'm wondering how can we start that first step here in Slovenia as a society? Because for me personally, with everything that I know that was going on, I probably don't know a lot of what was going on during the campaign and after the campaign. People were really hurt and people really are hurt. So what can we do as a nation to make that first step? Because I know that the community is tired. It's very tired and they don't have the energy. I don't think that we have the energy to make that first step.
I can imagine people must be very hurt. And probably disillusioned. Probably lose hope at times, Is it worthwhile trying again? Get up and fight another fight, or it's easy to give in.
Or be angry.
And it's easy to stay angry. And of course, if you stay angry, you just burn off more energy, and then eventually you just get so tired of that you give in. I guess it's about finding a safe place to deal with the hurt. Group support, group therapy. Be able to support each other and find a ways of not hurting ourselves more, that when they hurt us, that we don't start turning that in against ourselves. I mean, I've been through so many gay resource centres that tore themselves apart with infighting and arguing, and what they didn't realize was we're turning in on ourselves. We're now hurting ourselves as we are hurt. So I guess it's about finding a safe place to acknowledge that we're all hurting here. And this is really difficult because, yes, we need to be angry, and we need to be angry when we see injustice. But if we stay just angry, there's little possibility of... Don't forget, the homophobe comes from the same environment that we all come from. They're as trapped as we are. And the best way that you can begin to change minds is to engage in dialogue. And that's difficult when you're really angry, because I want to really hurt you when I'm angry because you've hurt me. But it doesn't change much because they just get more defensive. They put up stronger barriers. And of course, I know what I'm saying is easier said than done. It's much easier said than done, and it wasn't like that in Ireland. We were angry for decades. I guess what helped us, and we did get a lot of help along the way, was when the sexual abuse scandals broke in Ireland, and we realised that the church had covered it up for decades. The older people started turning against the church and said, no, we're not buying this. So in a way, the LGBTQ community got some help in that people's attitudes started to change on our behalf also. It made our job a little bit easier. But I guess I would say keep dialoguing. If you stay angry, the only response you get back will be more defensiveness. But your personal story is more powerful than any ideology. The more times you tell your personal story to friends, workers, colleagues, that's the impact. I mean, we could debate ideology, theology, philosophy until the cows come home around this issue. What packs the punch is if I tell you who I am. Let me tell you what it's like for me to live in your straight world. Your male-dominated straight world. I want to tell you what that's like for me as a man who's gay, as a woman who's lesbian or bisexual, or as a young person who's going through the process of transgendering. Let me tell you what it's like for me. That can affect change much greater than anger. It does mean that there's not a place for anger. There is. If there's only anger, the only thing you get back is more defenses. If that makes my point.
That's what Panty did in Ireland?
Yes, yeah. That's exactly what happened.
Yesterday I watched his speech at TEDx in Dublin, and she explains how homophobes are objecting to the phobia part.
Yes.
And I'll just read it because I had to write it down because I was pausing it and writing it. And she said they're afraid of what the world would look like when it treats gays, lesbian and bisexual people with the same respect as everybody else. They are afraid that that they won't fit in this brave world of equality. Why? I think that's beautiful. Why?
Because they're afraid.
But why? Where does that fear come from?
Homophobia.
That's based on gender.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because everything will reduce down to gender, which is why in my introduction I said I'm a man who's gay.
Okay.
So my world is defined by my gender.
Can you tell us a little bit more about gender and social constructs that define us?
Or sexual constructs. Because who we are, essentially, gets defined by gender. And the social roles that puts upon us of what does it mean to be a man? Straight man, gay man, bisexual man. What it means to be a woman, a lesbian woman, a bisexual woman, a straight woman, a single woman who's never married, which in some cultures is just awful. For a woman not to have children. All of these are gender roles imposed by heterosexual men in power, with large dollops of religious ideology thrown in just to keep it all bound together. And so when a young man or a young woman discovers that they're homosexual, the first thing it hits is, what does this mean now for me as a woman? Because now where do I fit in? Where do I fit into female culture? Where do I fit into straight culture? How will I fit into gay culture? How will I have children, not have children? As a man who's gay, does it lessen me as a man because I'm gay? I mean, look how hard we fought to get equality in the military. I had a friend who was marched off a US Navy ship with all the rest of his comrades standing at arms as he was marched down the gangplank, and they called him queer and faggot as they marched him off the ship in the 1960s because he was not considered man enough to be in the US military. And the lesbian women who served in the forces were seen not as women, but as men, because they had balls. So of course gender is hugely important in terms of sexuality and what it means to be a person who is gay, which is why I lead with gender first, not sexuality. Because if I lead with sexuality, then that begins to define me. And I don't want to be defined by my sexuality or gender. I think gender is very fluid. And I think this is the greatest challenge now. We now don't see gender as something static. I think I'm very open to gender fluidity.
That's because you live in Ireland.
No, it's because I think it's because as human beings we are gender fluid.
That's a critic to Slovenia. So.
I know. I didn't want to fall for it, but I know what you mean. We recently had in our national TV stations, we had a TV producer who arrived into work one Monday morning. I think I was telling Tomasz this, or somebody this, I think it was Tomasz. And he arrived into work on a Monday morning and he called all his team together, his production team. And he said, as of tomorrow, I want to let you all know I'm gender fluid. And the team went, you what? They thought it was like some disease. You have some being diagnosed. And he said, from tomorrow I'm gender fluid, so I could be male today, female tomorrow, half and half the day after. It was in the national papers for like one day, and then we've never heard of it since. And yeah, I like that idea of gender fluidity. I really like it. There's something very freeing. Who defines what it means to be a man? For me, it's a social construct. Or what does it mean to be a woman? Or a man-woman? I just think we're human beings. And I was doing an interview today with Ivana for Kerios, the magazine. And my first client, or my second client, maybe, first or second, after I qualified as a gestalt therapist, was a transvestite man. Now, can you imagine a newly qualified therapist? I get a call from this guy. And he arrives for therapy and he said, do you mind if I change? Do you have a bathroom? And I said, sure, because he was in a business suit. I thought he meant get into jeans. And he appeared beautifully dressed as a woman. And he said, can I do therapy? And he used his female name. Being the professionally trained therapist that I was, I said, of course, have a seat. Thinking of my supervisor's number in my head, I must ring her immediately after this session. And we worked together for 3 years, and I think it was the greatest lesson in gender and sexuality I've ever learned from that man. And he was a heterosexual man, married with 2 kids, who from time to time like to... Very fluid. It's freeing even to say this in public. Like, even the word gender fluid. It's like how we used to say years ago, you know, I'm a man who's gay. I get the same buzz when I say, how about gender fluid for a while? You know, we put boys into blue. We put girls in pink. What's that about? You know, girls only play with these toys and boys must play with that. What's that? If you leave kids alone, they don't do that. Most of the time, unless they're getting it at home. But leave them alone, they won't generally veer to that. I think it's very exciting.
The latest research made in Slovenia last year has shown that the percent of bullying in schools toward gay teens has risen from 20 to 44%. And also in the articles that you gave us, the statistic in Ireland is also quite concerning. I have it here. It says that some 56% of 14 to 18-year-old LGBT teens said they had self-harmed, and 70% of this age group had seriously thought of ending their own life.
Yes.
And very often also the victims of bullying stay quiet because they are afraid to expose themselves even more as being gay or lesbian or transgender or bisexual. And I think that it's not only the problem of the community, it's the problem of the whole society. And still, here in Slovenia, we are afraid to go to schools and to openly speak about it. And it feels like a vicious circle. Do you have any ideas? How can we break this circle?
With great difficulty, I think. But I think, as I said today in the interview with Ivana, this is where gestalt therapy plays a huge role. And I think psychotherapy has become very middle class. I don't know if it's the same in Slovenia, but certainly in Ireland it's become, therapists don't get into activism anymore. They're in their offices, nice plush offices. We read very wonderful research papers and books, and we're not out marching and fighting for change anymore. And I think this is an exact area where psychotherapists need to put their heads out over the parapet and say this is not acceptable. And I think there is a role here for therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, to start voicing their opposition to blatant homophobia in our education system. I think we need to challenge the education system, and it needs to come from therapists like myself. We need to say this is not okay to do this to children, and stop hiding behind our nice offices. I have a very strong view on that. I've always been an advocate. I've always been an activist for change, for women's rights, for our local rape crisis centre, for the Centre for a Refuge for Women who have been experienced domestic violence. I call it criminal violence. I think we need to speak out. Change won't just happen in therapeutic offices, because we do have a privileged place in society. I think therapists are very privileged in a sense that people come and share with us very deep experiences. I think we have a responsibility to speak out when we see what's wrong, because we are a field-based theory. We are part of the community. We're part of the environment. I think we need to call it what it is. That is homophobia in our education system. And to think that you can't go into a school and protect kids or speak about safety, to me that's homophobia. And we need to name it, and we need to call it. And I think there is a role for our elected representatives, leaders, to make more public statements. I certainly do.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Besides all of the pressure the community has to deal with, there's also the pressure inside of the community. you've spoken about it during the weekend. Can you also tell us a little bit more about this pressure, how to cope with it? What kind of pressure it is?
If you look at families where there's addiction, criminal domestic violence, what ends up happening in many cases is that the children start turning on each other because they've nowhere else to put the pain. And we're a family, and we're under enormous pressure, not just in Slovenia but in many parts of the world, and we don't have any support. And sometimes we turn it in on each other. So I liken it to like being a dysfunctional family where the hurt and the pain and the anger and the despair and the frustration has nowhere to go. So we turn it in on ourselves and we start hurting ourselves as a community. So I think there's a real need for more support, more therapeutic support, for more therapists to get involved, offer support groups for parents of LGBT community, for LGBT community themselves, for those who work in the community. I think there's a need for more support so that we don't hurt ourselves. I think we've been hurt enough. And I think we need to really look at what we begin to do to ourselves, that which was done to us. If that pressure, that rage, that anger has nowhere to go, it will become internalized as it does in dysfunctional families. It gets internalized and the family starts to tear itself apart. And if you work in social care, social work will recognize that phenomena. And so I liken it to that. And I think we have to be very aware that we can hurt ourselves as much as we have been hurt if we don't have enough support. And it is in Gestalt therapy, we have a very important part of Gestalt therapy is the level of support for the client. And if this community doesn't have enough support, we need to look at where can we get more. And I mean, I'd be more than willing, I'd be more than willing to come back to Ljubljana anytime and do workshops and support and make it as feasible. I know Tomasz would be very open, and I'm sure there are others to just give us space to come and do a workshop and free up some of that hurt or that anger, that rage, that so that we don't hurt ourselves. Or to do it yourselves within your own therapeutic community. There's some very excellent therapists in Ljubljana that I know. And to get some support system going here. I think support is vital, actually. Because we will hurt each other. I've seen it happen many times in Ireland. I've seen entire centres close down like this overnight because they couldn't hold it together enough to keep it going, or they lost the funding because they fought over some stupid issue, and what they didn't realize was it was their own internal dynamic that was causing it. And each blamed the other. The gays blamed the lesbians blamed the gays, then they blamed the outsiders, and then it just exploded. And that all sounds very new, I guess. Happens all the time. And what we don't realize is we're doing to ourselves that which was done to us.
So now we'll take a look at the Penty speech. Maybe before we take a look at the video, you can tell us a little bit more about Penty.
She's arrived. That's Penty just arrived.
And then we'll open the space to start the discussion. Okay. Please.
Some of you may have seen this already, have you? This went viral. This is like huge in the gay community. Penty is a drag queen from Dublin. Became huge within the last 5 years and sort of really became central to the whole referendum issue. Before that, there were like some amazingly brave people that fought the hard fight for 35, as long as I'm alive, for equality. But Penty seemed to do something very different. There was something about the way she presented herself and her theory that captured people's hearts. And she really got to people because she named homophobia. Nobody else dared do it. She was the first gay activist that I know that said, we're homophobic, we need to deal with it. And all of a sudden the gay community woke up and said, are we? She named it. And the background to this video is that every year in Dublin we have the Dublin Theatre Festival. And at the National Theatre, which is called the Abbey Theatre, hence you'll get this on YouTube, by the way, hence the title of this is Panty at the Abbey. They allow space at the end of a production for some social group to come in and talk to the audience. But the audience never knows which social group it will be. So it could be somebody from the gypsy community one night, could be somebody from LGBT, could be somebody from the Rape Crisis Centre, could be a migrant looking for migrant rights. It could be just some minority group that gets like 10 minutes to talk to the audience and then leave the stage. So this was Panty's show at the Abbey. A couple of things just to make it maybe a little bit more understandable. She mentions RTE, that's the national TV station and radio station in Ireland. She mentions a thing called a TD. A TD is a person who's elected to the Irish Parliament. So it's in Gaelic. It means a parliamentarian. I have another word for that, but as this may go on YouTube, I better be very careful because I may be looking for funding for a group. And I think other than that, you'll get it. The accent is very level, so she doesn't speak with a Dublin accent. But I think she says something really, really important. She gets it. And this, I think, began to turn the referendum for us. And the other thing that turned the referendum, I think we had a journalist, Ursula Halligan, who just was incredible, who was a woman who was lesbian, had never said that she was lesbian. We all saw her every night at 6 o'clock on the news. So it's like we knew her. She was like one of our sisters. She's been on TV for years. And during the campaign, by accident, she discovered her old school diary when she was at secondary school. And in her diary, she was writing about the heartache and the pain of thinking that she was attracted to the other schoolgirls and how it made her feel and how she wanted to die. And she'd forgotten about the diary. I'm getting a little emotional, so bear with me. And she talked about it for the first time on national television. She said, I am a woman who's lesbian. I just discovered my 14-year-old girl. And people began to say, Ursula's one of us. We know her. What difference does it make if she can marry? You know, people got to see the human story. So I think that was a big change. Panty's video, Ursula Halligan's statement, and then the former president of Ireland. Notice these are all women. They make wonderful change. The former president of Ireland, Mary McAleese, who would be a pretty conservative Roman Catholic, whose son was gay. And she came out and said, I'm a Roman Catholic and I believe in human rights for my son. And she fought a hard battle on our behalf. She was wonderful. And this campaign would never have succeeded without probably the oldest gay activist in Europe, Senator David Norris. Some of you here may know of him. He's pretty famous in Europe. He's been leading the fight for equality for most of my life. I can remember, very brave man. He's in his late 70s, early 80s now. But he fought a hard fight, and I think it almost killed him in the end. So all of those together give us Panty. This is where we are now. And I think you'll get what the video means. Enjoy it.
Tonight, we are delighted to welcome to the stage Ireland's most fabulous drag queen and famous activist, Panty.
my name is Panty, and for the benefit of the visually impaired or the incredibly naive, I am a drag queen. I am also a performer of sorts, and an accidental and occasional gay rights activist. As you may have already gathered, I am also painfully middle class. My father was a country vet. I went to a nice school, and afterwards I went to that most middle class of institutions, an art college. And although this may surprise some of you, I have always found gainful employment in my chosen field, gender discombobulation. So the kind of grinding, abject poverty that we saw so powerfully on stage tonight is something that I can thankfully say I have no experience of. But I do know a little something about oppression, or at least oppression is something that I can relate to. Now, I am not, of course, for a minute going to compare my situation to Dublin workers in 1913, but I do know what it feels like to be put in your place. Have any of you ever been standing at a pedestrian crossing when a car goes by and in it are a bunch of lads, and they lean out the window as they go by and shout "fag" and throw a milk carton at you? Now, it doesn't really hurt. I mean, after all, it's just a wet carton, and in many ways they're right. I am a fag. So it doesn't hurt, but it feels oppressive. And when it really does hurt is afterwards, because it's afterwards that then I wonder and worry and obsess over, what was it about me? I mean, what did they see in me? What was it that gave me away? And I hate myself for wondering that. It feels oppressive, and the next time that I'm standing at a pedestrian crossing, I hate myself for it, but I check myself to see what is it about me that gives the gay away, and I check myself to make sure that I'm not doing it this time. Have any of you ever come home in the evening and turned on the television and there is a panel of people, nice people, respectable people, smart people, the kind of people who probably make good neighborly neighbors, the kind of people who write for newspapers, and they're all sitting around and they are having a reasoned debate on the television, a reasoned debate about you, about what kind of person you are, about whether or not you're capable of being a good parent, about whether you want to destroy marriage, about whether or not you're safe around children, about whether or not God herself thinks you're an abomination, about whether in fact maybe you are intrinsically disordered. And even the nice TV presenter lady that you feel is like almost a friend because you see her being nice on TV all the time, even she thinks it's perfectly okay that they're all having this reasoned debate about you and about who you are and about what rights you deserve or don't deserve. And that feels oppressive. Have you ever been on a crowded train with one of your best gay friends, and inside a tiny part of you is cringing because he is being so gay? And you find yourself trying to compensate for his gayness by butching up a little, or by trying to steer the conversation onto safer, straighter territory. And this is you who has spent the last 35 years of your life trying to be the best gay possible. And yet there is still this small part of you that is embarrassed by his gayness. And I hate myself for that, and that feels oppressive. And when I am standing at a pedestrian bloody light, I am checking myself. Have you ever gone into your favorite neighborhood cafe with the paper that you buy every day, and you open it up and inside is a 500-word opinion written by a nice middle-class woman, the kind of woman who probably gives to charity, the kind of woman who you would be totally happy to leave your children with? And she is arguing over 500 words so reasonably about whether or not you should be treated less than everybody else, about arguing that you should be given fewer rights than everybody else. And when you read that, and then the woman at the next table gets up and excuses herself to squeeze by you and smiles at you, and you smile back and nod and say, no problem, and inside you wonder to yourself, does she think that about me too? And that feels oppressive. And you go outside and you stand at the pedestrian crossing and you check yourself, and I hate myself for that. Have you ever turned on the computer and you see videos of people who are just like you in countries that are far away and countries that are not far away at all, and they are being imprisoned and beaten and tortured and murdered and executed because they are just like you? And that feels oppressive. 3 weeks ago, I was on the television, and I said that I believe that people who actively campaign for gay people to be treated less or treated differently are, in my gay opinion, homophobic. Now, some people who actively campaign for gay people to be treated less under the law took great exception to that characterization, and they threatened legal action against me and RTE. Now, RTE, in its wisdom, decided incredibly quickly to hand over a huge sum of money to make it all go away. I haven't been quite so lucky. And for the last 3 weeks, I have been lectured to by heterosexual people about what homophobia is and about who is allowed to identify it. Straight people have lined up, ministers, senators, barristers, journalists have lined up to tell me what homophobia is and to tell me what I am allowed to feel oppressed by. People who have never experienced homophobia in their lives, people who have never checked themselves at a pedestrian crossing, have told me that unless I am being thrown into prison or herded onto a cattle truck, then it is not homophobia, and that feels oppressive. And so now, Irish gay people, we find ourselves in this ludicrous situation where we are not only not allowed to say publicly what we feel oppressed by, we're not even allowed to think it, because the very definition, our definition, has been disallowed by our betters. And for the last 3 weeks, I've been denounced from the floor of the Oireachtas to newspaper columns to the seething morass of internet commentary, denounced for using hate speech because I dare to use the word homophobia. And a jumped up queer like me should know that the word homophobia is no longer available to gay people, which is a spectacular and neat Orwellian trick, because now it turns out that gay people are not the victims of homophobia. Homophobes are the victims of homophobia. But let me just say that it's not true, because I don't hate you. I do, it is true, believe that almost all of you are probably homophobes. But I'm a homophobe. I mean, it would be incredible if we weren't. I mean, to grow up in a society that is overwhelmingly and stiflingly homophobic and to somehow escape unscathed would be miraculous. So I don't hate you because you're homophobes. I actually admire you. I admire you because most of you are only a bit homophobic. And to be honest, considering the circumstances, that is pretty good going. But I do sometimes hate myself. I hate myself because I fucking check myself when standing at pedestrian crossings. And sometimes I hate you for doing that to me. But not right now. Right now, I like you all very much for giving me a few moments of your time, and for that, I thank you.
money that the national TV station paid out to keep the journalists quiet was €80,000 of taxpayers' money. It's a lot of money for a homophobe. That's what he got, because he didn't like what he said. I'm aware as I observe that this material may impact some of you at an emotional level, so I just want to say, take care of yourselves. It can't but touch you.
I think now we're ready to answer some questions if some of you have. So please ask freely.
Yes, please. Yes.
And I have this conflicting idea. Sometimes I feel that as part of the LGBT community, always be kept quiet and we must always be nice. But I also feel that even though we're entitled to some anger, I feel that anger can be quite productive.
Yes.
Would you agree, or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I thought I was clear on that. I think anger has a place. I think if we only have anger, then we are trapped in the same dance as we are with the oppressor. Then we only have one piece of the process. And anger is very important. Without anger, we can't motivate ourselves forward. If we only have anger, then we're in trouble. So we need to use our anger creatively as a mechanism to support other means of contact. If you only stay angry, the only thing the other person will ever do is put up stronger defenses. And it becomes a no-win situation. You are trapped then with your own anger. And I think that's one of the dangers that we can very easily fall into. So anger is very important. It's very productive. It's a way of also keeping some sanity. But if you only have anger, you'll never achieve anything. You need to have a wider spectrum of your responses. And I think that sometimes is a critique of some parts of our community, is that we are only angry. Yes, of course we're angry, but we need to use our anger creatively. If we get stuck in it, we are then more victimized than supportive. If that answers your question. I think that's where the process of coming home is what we talked about this weekend at our workshop here. It was a very healthy space where we could explore those issues of anger and rage and finding equilibrium and finding different ways of communicating, which is part of coming home rather than coming out angrily.
Yeah, I feel like I'm not very homophobic, so I thought maybe you could give us a few more examples of how we are homophobic against ourselves, I guess.
It's very personal to each person. A lot of it has got to do with we use derogatory language against ourselves, derogatory thoughts. If we stop ourselves wanting to express tenderness in public and we pull back. If we are derogatory against others who we see. If we're constantly angry with the homophobe, they're touching something. So I've never yet met a person who is grown up in a homophobic culture and not have some element of homophobia. It may just be a tiny piece, like Panti said, but it's personal to everyone. Some people it's very obvious, and for others it's a very quiet experience of that. But I think it's worth exploring.
I have a question. So if we discuss support system, like, do you have any examples or ideas how that would work? So what kind of support system, with which form, necessarily theoretical, or could it just be a place where people hang out? And
I think it can be everything. I mean, whatever is needed. I think first you need to identify the need. Like each community's needs will be different. What is probably needed here now is very different from what we need in Ireland right now, because we've achieved quite a lot, so we don't need the same level of support. But certainly there needs to be a place that is safe. Primarily, I think it's about finding a space within your culture here to be safe to be you. I think that's absolutely primary. That there has to be a place where you can express yourself freely and safely. But that also, I think there needs to be a place to explore your sexuality in a very safe way. And that may require some group therapy, group support. It may need support for your family. It may need support for extended family. So I think the more support groups that can be put in place. We had many support groups in the city where I came from for parents, brothers and sisters, and then the two groups would come together, and that was really, really, really effective. Really effective. And we explored, I think we talked about this over the weekend, that we would open our community, and so we would bring our straight friends to our events and start sharing our culture and our world more. And of course that creates problems. Because then people say, we have no place to go, this is only our place, and they shouldn't be coming here, and then we become just as aggressive as they are. So it's about being able to touch the difference of the other. But I think any support group that you can organize, helplines, any group that will be a safe place to be together, I think would be very supportive. But it has to be safe. It primarily has to be safe. And also safe from homophobia, because I've seen as much homophobia within our community as I've ever seen outside. And we must challenge it within our own community when we see it, and not allow it.
I'll take a chance at this moment, and I'd like everyone to know that you can get that safe space at Legebitra every day. Just to drop by and drink a cup of coffee or a cup of tea. Every day we're open at our info point from 12 o'clock to 4. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Tuesday, Thursday from 12 to 6. So you're all very welcome to drop by. That's why we're there every day. And the coffee is free, so.
And they're the sort of things that I would be saying that need to be supportive. Because a lot of the time we complain, oh, there's nothing there for us, we have no place to go, and then when things are set up, we don't support them. Or we get into infighting and we complain, and it's not the way it should be, and it's not perfect. And you got to make the best of what you have. May not be perfect, but
it can be pretty awesome, because sometimes we have days when the sun is shining, we have this yard and we're sitting outside drinking coffee, playing guitar, singing. So yes, you're welcome, all of you. So spread the word. We also have the support group, the chance of counseling for personal counseling, family counseling. So we have the support system. We just have to spread the word.
I would encourage any support like that. Yeah. Yes.
Some gay people use, like, for example, fag, and they own it.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I would never use that word. Full stop. That's a form of internalized homophobia. I would never use it. If it's not okay out there, it's not okay in here. And if I do it to myself, I'm internalizing that which was done to me. So it's like okay for African Americans to call themselves the N-word. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the work of Maya Angelou, the African American civil rights leader who was a Baptist, very devout Baptist, but she played a key role in LGBT liberation in the US, against everything her church said. And she tells a story about when she would see young African American men in the ghettos refer to each other with the N-word. she had one response each time. And she would go up to them, look them very firmly in the eye, and she would say, "Your passage has been paid for." They would look at her and say, "Well, what's this old lady mean?" And she would simply say, "Your passage is paid. The price is paid." And they would say, "What do you mean?" And she said, "They died in the ships coming over. They died on the slave plantations. They took the whip so that you could be free. You don't need to use their word." And she would just walk away then. That's all she would ever say. And she would walk away.
Just developing on what you said and what you have just explained, and I kind of agree with Maya, and I wouldn't really dish this on that, but for example, the word queer used to mean something bad, but then a part of the community, let's say a part of the community, individuals within the community took that word, queer, and made it positive. You know, change the meaning of it. And now using queer within the community does not mean anymore something bad, but it means something completely different. So I think what you were saying probably, but correct me if I'm wrong, because now I'm just explaining what you already said, is that taking a word that is derogatory by the community and then changing it to something that is positive. You know, because I come from a minority also group, and we use this word "Čefur," which means a person coming from the republics of ex-Yugoslavia, except from Slovenia, because you're living in Slovenia, and I'm part of that community also. And I use that word for myself, but I don't allow other people to use it for me, because coming from people who are not part of this minority group, it means something derogatory. But when I use it for myself, just for myself, it means I'm confirming my identity.
I see it very differently. Again, both examples use the oppressor's word. I don't want to use the word of the oppressor. I don't want to have to make it positive because it's their word. I don't want to get captured by their word. I don't have to turn their word into anything. I want to define myself. Because if I am using a word and then I have to change it to give it a different meaning, I'm still using their word. So I want to define myself, and that's why I define myself as a man who is gay. In fact, most of the time I use homosexual because it's much more definitive. I'm not afraid to use the word homosexual because that is truly who I am. What's wrong with being homosexual? But I would never use words like faggot or queer or anything like that because it's their words. And I don't want to have to do gymnastics with their words. If you think about it.
Yeah, it's a great point.
Yeah, we have good. We have travellers community in Ireland, the gypsy community, who have special words for themselves that they say only they can use. And if anybody else uses it, it's offensive, but it's a double meaning. That's a double standard. That gives mixed messages.
I also comment about like the marriage referendum here compared to in Ireland. Like when I compare it to the one that was here to when we had it in Ireland the year before, like it was really similar. And like we also had a huge influence in the church in Ireland. Like nobody was listening to them because they were angry at the church, but simply because they did so many secrets and stuff. And then when I look at Slovenia, like, do they have to get angry at the church for this? Because when you look at it, I think really it was the older generation here that really said no. And it was being angry at the church that turned our older generation to not listen to them anymore when they were saying, this is wrong, don't let it happen, blah, blah, blah. Like, what advice could we give to Slovenia that says this is how you do it differently, even though there are different factors to think about it?
I wouldn't want to give advice. Advice is pretty easy to give. I don't live here, so I don't have to deal with this on a daily basis. You're Irish? Where from? Cavan? I'm from Armagh. Oh God. See? We have our differences in Ireland too. Actually, it was much more than that for me that changed it in Ireland. What changed it in Ireland was we had a phenomena where we got all the young people to phone their grandparents. Now, if you go on YouTube, you'll find some really moving videos of young lesbian women and gay men phoning their grandmother and say, you know, Grandma, you've been my best supporter all my life, da-da-da. This referendum is coming up. Would you vote yes? And they're just some of the most touching responses where the grandmothers got touched by the human story rather than the ideology. And that's what can win it. And lots of young Irish people rang their friends in America, in Australia, lots of young Irish people who had emigrated, like Slovenians emigrate for economic reasons or homophobic reasons, and they came home by the plane load. Buses were coming from London, from Paris, from Geneva. Guys were flying home from New Zealand. Girls with their girlfriends were coming home from New York. And the TV cameras were at the airport, checking them in and getting their stories. And they said they wanted a better future for the kids. So yes, we started to change the mind of the older people, but actually it was the middle group, the parents, that was probably the most difficult. The older people were easy to influence. They'd lived their lives. They had nothing to lose. We tell a story. One of my best friends, she's another gestalt therapist, and she's a very good friend of my husband and mine. And so she said to her mother, who's from West Cork, if you know West Cork people, they have a very distinct accent. They speak like this. Oh, West Cork. And she said to her mother, she said, Mom, what way are you voting in the referendum? And her mother's sort of right wing. And she said, oh, Jesus, I have to vote no. She said, you couldn't allow them to marry. So Fionnuala said to her mum, but what about Kevin and Favo? And she said, those two, that's okay for them. It's fine for them. And Fionnuala said, but why is it fine for them? She said, but I know them. She said, they're two decent fellas. She said, sure, why couldn't they marry? She said, sure, that makes no bloody sense. So Fionnuala was playing her, and she said, so if you vote no, that means Kevin and Favo couldn't get married. All right. I said, okay. And then Fionnuala said, and what about your grandchildren? What if, like Fionn and Fionnuala, what if they were gay or lesbian and wanted to marry their lover? Would you deny them that? And she said, Jesus, you're pushing it now. Come on, give me a break, she said. She said, I'm 70-something years old. Let me think about it. Anyway, after the vote, her 3 daughters went to her and they said, Ma'am, how did you vote? She said, God forgive me, I voted yes. So there were many factors that won it in Ireland. One of the biggest ones, though, was the impact of the cover-up of the sexual abuse. The church, by its own abuse, lost the moral ground. And something that I think they do very skillfully here is that they keep linking homosexuality and pedophilia together. They put the two words very skillfully together in many sentences. And that always needs to be challenged. Every time they do it, we must say no. Because that really frightens people. And we must be able to separate those two words. Every time they use it, highlight that they've used it. Because it's coming from an organization that covered up the systematic rape of children to save its own skin. And they have the audacity to put those two words together. How dare they? That makes me mad. So that got challenged in Ireland, not with anger. We simply challenged it. We never got angry. We said, you're doing it again. So that, I think, changed a lot.
I think also what you say about the importance of personal stories.
Yes.
Ideology is
Crucial.
Remember, this, The Voice of Shame.
Yeah, the voice of shame. Yeah. Yes. 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 Absolutely. And I guess if I was to not advise, but to suggest, I would say tell your personal stories until you're absolutely blue in the face from telling your personal story. And that will start to dissolve your shame. Because as a community, we carry a lot of shame. And we have to accept that fact. The more you tell your story, the less of that you'll start to dissolve it. But make it personal. Like, this is what it's like for me. This is where I'm coming from. This is what it's like for me to live in your world. This is what it's like when I go out on the street and I walk hand in hand with my girlfriend or my boyfriend. I haven't seen one male gay couple holding hands yet since I arrived in Ljubljana. I haven't seen a gay couple kiss yet. Males, not yet. I haven't seen it during the day. Maybe at night, I don't know. But I don't see any public displays of affection. It's just not there. I don't get a sense of it. No, I mean within gay people. Okay, so maybe it's a cultural thing. Okay. What I do notice is that men here do not make eye contact. I'm quite struck by that. Men don't actually look at you in the eye. I've had some funny experiences over the 2 days. At home we make eye contact quite a lot. And what I notice is when I make eye contact with men, they very quickly divert my attention. So I think there's something in that about what it means to be a man in Slovenian culture. And if another man looks at him, are they threatened or frightened or don't know what to do or maybe just unfamiliar with it? I don't know, but it's something that I've noticed. But tell your personal stories. I think you can't argue with a personal story, but you can argue with theology. You can argue philosophy. You can't argue with your personal experience. So we move it from a Gestalt perspective, what we call the I-it, to an I-thou meeting. You can't argue with me if I tell you what it's like, but we could argue over theology or philosophy. You can't argue with me because it's my experience. That is what wins hearts and minds. And you will never win it with anger alone. Anger alone will only put up bigger defenses on the other side. And don't forget, the homophobic person is as frightened as you are. They're as trapped as you are. And it would be very easy to demonize them and point the finger. The braver part of the journey is to try and understand where they're coming from, with holding your ground and be able to argue your point, but to understand they come from the same carpet as you and I do. Same school system, same family system, same church-dominated culture. They come honestly as they are.
Any other question? No?
Okay. There's another video that you might find to complete that cycle on YouTube, and it's called Panty's Christmas Message. I don't know, have any of you seen it? Again, our national TV station, in their wisdom, it sort of shows the journey that we've come. You know that in Britain, in England, every Christmas Day at 3 o'clock, the Queen of England addresses her subjects after lunch, and she speaks to her people. Well, now Panty has now been given the grand Irish title of the Queen of Ireland. We haven't had a queen since Celtic times, but now she's been given the honorary title of Queen of Ireland. So the national TV station decided to have a cultural game, and they said, we'll give her a public address on Christmas Day. So on Christmas Day, she spoke to the nation at 3 o'clock, just like the British Queen, and she thanked her subjects for voting yes. And she thanked those for saying no. And she gave a wonderful speech. And it sort of rounded off the entire experience. And I hadn't seen it, but I was getting texts on my phone. Jesus, Kevin, panties talking to the nation. I thought they were playing tricks with me, and they said, switch over to RT. I said, I'm not here, I'm in Italy. And then I had to go on YouTube that night and find it. It really is wonderful, and it brings a nice end to the story. So, listen, thank you guys for coming. Thank you for being here. Thanks for listening. Don't forget, it's only my opinions, my experience. It's not God sent, because you have to live in your environment, not mine. But if I can be helpful in any way, in terms of support or just being there as a mentor or whatever, I'm there. Thank you.